So is Secretary Hegseth taking responsibility or shifting blame and possibly throwing some of his subordinate commanders under the bus for a controversial strike on September 2nd? Turns out it kind of depends how you read between the lines and interpret new statements from the Pentagon and the White House. So let's get into it. Now, starting out with a little background here, on November 28th, the Washington Post published an article citing anonymous sources, which is important, and we'll come back to that here in a minute, alleging that Secretary Hegseth gave the order to, quote, kill them all as operations kicked off in the Caribbean. What you're seeing on the screen here is the very first strike. This footage was released publicly. The Washington Post article alleges that after the smoke cleared from this strike, they saw survivors clinging to the wreckage, and a second strike was then ordered to finish them off. Now, a couple key components to keep in mind here, and I should preface this with, I'm not a lawyer, so we're going to keep this at a very high level. But three things that I've seen come up in recent arguments that are worth tackling head on here, because it'll give us a better idea of what to watch for, what's important and what isn't. First off, there are different laws for war on land than there are for war at sea. You might say that's stupid, or that shouldn't be the case, or we need to change that. I got it. That's how it is today. Not just on the international stage, but also here domestically. And those are the laws being operated under on September 2nd. That is why, looking at strike footage or announcements from Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, where we carried out a strike and somebody got away, so we carried out another strike to kill them, that is apples and oranges to striking the survivors of a shipwreck. Again, it's a different set of laws. Like it or hate it, that's what the law is. Second, this is not just a matter of international law, like the ICC or the United Nations that we may or may not be signatory to. U.S. law within the U.S. Department of Defense specifically, outlaws the deliberate targeting of survivors of a shipwreck, and also outlaws saying that we will offer no quarter to enemy combatants. So this is not a matter of what would the international community do to us. It's a matter of, are we adhering to our own laws here in the United States? The third one is around the terrorist designation. It just doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, whether we designate someone a terrorist, an enemy combatant, a non-state armed actor, or a civilian, that does not absolve the United States and U.S. forces from operating within the confines of U.S. law. So, felt like it was worth getting each one of those three out of the way. But turning now to Secretary Hegseth's initial response here after these allegations dropped, he said, quote, as usual, the fake news is delivering more fabricated, inflammatory, and derogatory reporting to discredit our incredible warriors fighting to protect the homeland. Our current operations in the Caribbean are lawful under both U.S. and international law, with all actions in compliance with the law of armed conflict and approved by the best military and civilian lawyers up and down the chain of command. Now, the Pentagon had a couple statements of their own. Kingsley Wilson, the deputy Pentagon spokesperson, referred to this story as, quote, fake news by phony politicians. The Pentagon spokesperson, Sean Parnell, said, quote, we told the Washington Post that this entire narrative was false yesterday. These people just fabricate anonymously sourced stories out of whole cloth. Fake news is the enemy of the people. And then the only thing we really saw from the White House here was from Stephen Chung, the White House comms director, who said the Washington Compost provides no facts and no substantiation. They literally just printed what some unnamed random person said and reported it as fact. This is the same playbook used during the first term. The difference is that nobody trusts outlets like the Washington Post anymore. Now, President Trump was asked about this while on Air Force One. I'm going to summarize it here with some direct quotes from CBS because it is very hard to hear when they're doing these interviews inside the plane. But CBS reports that President Trump said Sunday that he, quote, wouldn't have wanted the second strike, but defended Hegseth's handling of the incident, saying the secretary told him he did not order the subsequent attack. Quote, the first strike was very lethal. It was fine, the president told reporters on Air Force One, saying he has great confidence in Hegseth. He added, quote, I'm going to find out about it, but Pete said he did not order the death of those two men. Now, following that statement from President Trump, we did see more from Secretary Hegseth, where he responded with a meme shown here on the screen of Franklin the Turtle targeting narco-terrorists, a post that seems to have not been super well received by the publisher of the children's book that came out today, saying they did not approve of the use. Now, we should mention that while we have all of these claims that it's fake news and not true, the House Armed Services and Senate Armed Services committees, both led by Republicans, have independently said that they are opening investigations into the events surrounding this strike. Those investigations, as far as I know, are ongoing right now. Now, turning to what the context and what the issue is here, I want to play a clip from Brent Hume over at Fox News that kind of gives you an idea of what to be watching for and listening for as we play some clips and dive into the details of the White House and the Pentagon statements yesterday. Here's Brent Hume on Fox News.
Just came to light recently that there was a second strike on the same target. The White House says it was done within the laws of armed conflict to make sure that the target was eliminated. But critics say this was done to make sure there were no survivors, which would be an entirely different matter, Brett.
Well, that's what it comes down to is what the intention of the second strike was. Was it to demolish the rest of the boat that had been hit but not completely destroyed, or was it for the principal purpose of eliminating the survivors? Eliminating the survivors would be a big problem if that was what they were. That was what it was all about. If they were killed in the course of the rest of the boat being destroyed, if it was sufficiently intact to cause U.S. military personnel down there to think that the job had not been finished, that's another matter. So I think it's going to be that's going to be what we're going to see investigated here in the weeks ahead. And then, of course, there's the question of whether Pete Hegseth really said. Secretary Hegseth really said, kill them all, or whether he never said that, and the order to carry out the second strike was given by an admiral who was in charge of the mission. So those are fact patterns that they're going to have to be established here before we know what really happened. Democrats, of course, are pouncing. And when the long knives are out the way they are for anybody in the Trump administration, you got to really wait for the facts to come in to make a judgment.
All right, so then turning to some new statements issued by the White House and the Pentagon just yesterday, we have White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, who fielded a lot of questions on this subject. The answers were all pretty much the same, so I'm playing what I think are the ones that kind of encapsulate her answers. But either way, starting out here from Caroline Leavitt, the official statement that she read in the press briefing yesterday.
To be clear, does the administration deny that second strike happened, or did it happen and the administration denies that Secretary Hegseth gave the order?
The latter is true, Abe, and I have a statement to read for you here. President Trump and Secretary Hegseth have made it clear that presidentially designated narco-terrorist groups are subject to lethal targeting in accordance with the laws of war. With respect to the strikes in question on September 2nd, Secretary Hegseth authorized Admiral Bradley to conduct these kinetic strikes. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was destroyed and the threat to the United States of America was eliminated.
Now, we mentioned earlier how this isn't just a matter of international law, but also U.S. law. So we have one of the reporters citing U.S. law and saying, you keep saying that this is a lawful strike, but how does this line up with the actual U.S. law that's on the books? And here's what the White House had to say.
You said that second strike was in full accordance with the law of armed conflict, but the Navy's own manual of law of war says that specifically firing on survivors from a wrecked vessel is an example of a war crime that's forbidden under U.S. law and the law of armed conflict. So how was that second strike in following law of armed conflict and then second on immigration?
Again, Andrew, I would reiterate to you the strike was conducted in international waters and in accordance with the law of armed conflict. And since somebody asked about Congress, and it's sort of related to Venezuela, I also want to add that Secretary Hegseth spoke with members of Congress who may have expressed some concerns over the weekend. And there have also been 13 bipartisan briefings to Congress on the Venezuelan strikes. There have been a number of document reviews for members of Congress to review the classified DOJ Office of Legal Counsel opinion and other related documents. 29 senators and 92 representatives have reviewed those documents, which is about 2/3 of those are Democrat members, and they have been made available to all 100 senators, all 435 members of the House, and to general counsels of the relevant committees on a bipartisan basis for their review.
And then kind of the core here that keeps getting brushed over is the survivors. Were there survivors? Were they deliberately targeted? That's another question here raised to Caroline Leavitt.
So so much of the concern from Democrats and Republicans is focused on the survivors. Why won't the administration either confirm or deny or reveal whether or not there were survivors after that initial first strike? And what imminent threat would two survivors pose who were clinging presumably to the wreckage of that boat?
Again, as I said, I think you guys are sort of not listening fully to the statement I've provided. Admiral Bradley worked well within his authority and the law, directing the engagement to ensure the boat was totally destroyed and the threat to the narco-terrorists, to the United States, was eliminated. And for any further questions about his thinking, I would defer you to the Department of War. I obviously wasn't in the room for these strikes.
Now, these statements made by the White House press secretary led to some speculation that they are throwing Admiral Bradley, the special operations commander who oversaw this operation, under the bus, saying he's the one who authorized the strike. It was his decision to do it. So Secretary Hegseth, after this press briefing, issued a statement saying, quote, "Let's make one thing crystal clear. Admiral Mitch Bradley is an American hero, a true professional, and has my 100% support. I stand by him and the combat decisions he has made on the September 2nd mission and all others since. America is fortunate to have such men protecting us. When we say we have the backs of our warriors, we mean it." Now, the New York Times actually came out with an article just yesterday, not really contradicting, but adding to, making all of this even muddier than it already was, which is super helpful, right? So they said, according to 5 U.S. officials who spoke separately on the condition of anonymity to discuss a sensitive matter that is under investigation, Mr. Hegseth, ahead of the September 2nd attack, ordered a strike that would kill people on the boat and destroy the vessel and its purported cargo of drugs. But each official said, Mr. Hegseth's directive did not specifically address what should happen if a first missile turned out to not fully accomplish all of those things. And the official said his order was not a response to surveillance footage showing that at least 2 people on the boat survived the first blast. Admiral Bradley ordered the initial missile strike and then several follow-up strikes that killed the initial survivors and sank the disabled boat. As that operation unfolded, they said, Mr. Hegseth did not give any further orders to him. Again, the reading of that from the New York Times does seem to put more of the responsibility here for the strikes on the survivors on Admiral Bradley. All right, so in terms of what comes next, I think the big, most obvious thing here is the Senate and the House Armed Services Committees say that they're talking about bringing in Secretary Hegseth and members of the chain of command involved in this operation to testify under oath. They're probably also going to look for the strike footage to be released publicly, maybe some of the DOJ authorizations for the use of force in these specific operations. Between now and that information coming out, we're probably going to get a lot more speculation. And again, what I think is happening right now, a lot of reading between the lines of who ordered what and when. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.